Hello guys, Joker the Fool here, back at it again with the review of the Kamen America Alpha manga. So, of course, Kamen America is the flagship series from Iconic Comics. They've done a whole bunch of stuff, but so much of it is centered around Kamen America because, of course, there is a whole Iconic Comics verse, and that includes Black Ops, Soul Finders, and Kamen America. They've got other stuff that they do as well, but so much of it is centered around the story of Charlotte Sasha Vanders, who you see on this cover right here. And of course, Charlotte Sasha Vanders, or also known as Carly, is a young woman who's a fashion designer. She's working in the military. She gets hit by a meteor, all right, and gets infected with these Primaritons, and this gives her electric powers. And on the course of that, she also meets a Russian private military agent, Misha Levkova, who has fire powers. And then she has her friend Kimiko, who is Japanese, and she has water powers, and they form the Common Core. And that's basically the main shtick of the story, and that is the first arc. And this manga is an adaptation of basically the first arc, the formation of the Common Core. It does end with Kimmy just beginning to get her powers. So you're going over basically the two main characters, the first two main characters, and then Kimmy at the end, and then Sylvia, who is Kamen UN. Much later in the franchise, she's introduced, but she's first introduced as an adversary. So this is basically most of the first arc is done in this adaptation, and it's done quite well. So if you are a fan of manga, then you're going to feel right at home here. And of course, this is reading right to left. So if I go to the back cover here and you open it up, you'll see something that's very classic in any sort of English translation of manga, where you're reading this like you would any sort of normal book, basically having, hey, this is how you're supposed to read. And of course, you got a little chibi Carly there, basically telling you that this is the correct way to read it. So we're going to flip over to the front of here and give you a preview of this art. This is, of course, done by Studio Nice, and he brings a very classic manga style to this. Absolutely love this. So one of the things I really was very complimentary, or I praised Tim Lim a lot throughout his Kamen America and everything he's done with Iconic Comics, this includes Black Ops, is that he's really good at melding this style of American comics and manga, and you have this really fantastic style that just works. Studio Nice does really lean into this being a manga. This feels like anything you would pick up from this media. This feels like anything that you would read if you're going through the regular things that Shonen Jump publishes. And the way that most manga is published is that it will be published in these magazines. Of course, back in the day, you'd actually pick up the magazines and it would have a whole bunch of manga, and these would be 20 to 30 pages, the typical size of a American floppy. Those would be chapters, and the ones that actually were popular would actually stick around, and they would be released in these volumes. So there's about 8 chapters in this manga. They're called articles, and it covers, like I said, the very beginning of the story. So if you're absolutely new to Kamen America and you're a fan of manga, I would wholeheartedly recommend you reading this, because this just reads like a really good manga. And especially if you like something like My Hero Academia, you like stuff like Dragon Ball, you like One Piece, anything that's sort of fantastical and it's got that fan service, you're going to really feel at home right here. So this art is absolutely fantastic. The panel layout just makes this feel like a manga. Of course, there's no coloring. You've got that whole gray tone there, and it's all done quite well. And one of the things that I really like is that even though this has this explicit manga style, you still are able to tell the character designs quite well. So if you've read the Kamen America comics, and you're picking this up to read this, you're going to see Carly and recognize her. You're going to see Misha. You're going to see Penelope. You're going to see Hair Trigger. You're going to see all the characters that you're familiar with, and you're going to know that they actually look like that. You're going to recognize them, even though they are drawn differently. So you see Vicky, you see Siggy, and they look different, but they still look recognizable because Studio Nice is doing a really good job of leaning full on into the manga style while not taking away the heart of what Kamen America is. And I think that's a really, really fantastic thing because Kamen America is definitely something that has a lot of play with the Japanese audience. You've gotten, I think they're at like the third fan comic that's being released amongst the fans of the Japanese franchise. There's like licensed merchandise. Of course, this manga is probably going to get a lot of play in Japan. I imagine the Japanese version of this is going to be at a lot of manga cafes, and you're going to get a lot of Japanese readers who are just going to pick this up, start reading it, and then realize, hey, you can get like 10 volumes of like full-colored comics for this, and it's going to be really cool. Hopefully, one day we get an anime out of this because this is just a fantastic storyboard for what would make a fantastic anime. I would be 100% all for this. And like I said, if you've read Kamen America, about the first, I would say, 4 or 3 volumes even, you would have basically all of the story for this. Although what you are getting in this is basically a slightly different perspective on this story. You get more character interactions between Misha and her sister. You get a little bit more insight into Black Ops. Not too much more. But stuff like that, you get just a little bit more, I would say, with Lansky's character. Although not too much more, I would say, either. But just, it feels like it's a bit of a different perspective. And of course, for experienced fans of this series, it's nice to revisit the beginning plot of this, and you get to view it from a different perspective, so you get more introspective because you're not experiencing it for the first time. So you're like, oh, I know how Carly got her powers. Oh, I know how Misha got her powers and how that showdown went. You're getting to view it from a different perspective, so you get to notice more things as well. And of course, one of the things I'll have to say is that the way this is bound is that it can make it a bit harder to see some of the panels that are in the spine here. And of course, some of the action can come off as being a bit too fantastical. So it can get a bit lost and being a bit noisy. But most of the time, it all actually works. And it is a really, really fun to look at. And of course, you've got just like this very classic, like the lettering, the facial expressions. It does have this very dynamic and vibrant feel to it. And that is just something that you really get with a well done manga. And then, of course, like I said, you do have that pretty typical, not typical, but you do have this chapter format is the article. So swooping through Article 1, this is, of course, Article 2, which is where Misha is first introduced into the story. And like I said, this is about 8 chapters. So this is a pretty typical manga format where you've got basically the story broken up into about 8, it can be like 6 to 8, 20 to 30 page chapters. And those are going to typically conform to what you would get in comic issues. And then they're released as a trade paperback. Like Battle Beast, its first trade paperback is going to collect the first 6 issues, I believe. And each one of those is about 22 to 30 pages. And this is basically the same format. And it's how the manga companies are able to find out which series are the best because they release them as chapters in these magazines. That's what Shonen Jump was originally back in the day. It still kind of is, but that was more like when magazines were actually popular and being distributed. Shonen Jump was a physical magazine you would buy, and the fans would determine which one was the most popular, and those were the ones that would keep getting play. And then they would get distributed into these volumes. Nowadays, a lot of it's just released online, and then the volumes are what's actually printed out for people to buy and read. And a lot of these in Japan, they end up in manga cafes where people can go and actually read them. And like I said, this is something that I imagine is going to get a lot of play in the manga cafes and just in Japan in general, because it's just such a good homage to what the art form of manga is in terms of how it's presented, in terms of the story that it tells, in terms of the mannerisms. And of course, I'd say the plot of Kamen America, it does really play well. Of course, it's got this like very like satirical American vibe to it. It does focus on Carly, and I think Carly's character, she really is emblematic of like the best virtues of America, of American patriotism. Of course, she's also got this very bubbly personality that just is a draw. I'd say not just to like Japanese audiences, but to just anybody in general. And then, of course, you've got Kimiko's character, who's Kamen Ramen, and while she appears at the very end of this story, if we can see here, we've got we've got her right here. So that's basically like at the last page of this is where she's going to get introduced. So assuming we get the second issue of this manga, or the second volume of this manga, I really want to say, is when we'll get into Kimiko's story. And I really am looking forward to this story being retold through the rest of the mangas. Hopefully Studio Nice does keep on doing this, and you can see he actually put references to some of his favorite anime and manga, which I'm not going to go through each one and try and catch them, but stuff like this is like pretty typical for like your neat style character, which I absolutely do love. So you are getting just so much of the passion that mangaka are known for, which is why manga has sold millions, not just in Japan, but in the international stage. And of course, like I said, it's just from everything from the lettering, from the shading, from the character designs, it just feels like you're reading a manga, but it also is, you are reading Kamen America. So you are getting that experience. And like I said, you are getting about the first 3.5 volumes of the story that Tim Lim and Mark told starting in 2020, I believe, being retold in this story with some added details that does enhance the reading experience for people like myself. If you've read all of Kamen America, I would recommend picking this up because it does, I'd say, fill in some gaps, and it does let you relive the classic story of Kamen America, as well as definitely being something that first-time readers who are interested in Kamen America really ought to pick up as the introduction to the series, because like I said, this starts at the very beginning of Carly's story, so you are getting in on the ground level when you're reading this. And of course, assuming that you're going to keep up with this manga series and adapt the rest of the volumes into this, then you'll be able to get insights into the whole story. And I hopefully really want them to do this, because this is a fantastic start to Kamen America manga. It is everything I wanted it to be when they said we're doing a manga, and it certainly is everything that I think you can really ask for from a good manga. It pays homage to the art form. It is a good adaptation on its own, and it just has passion from the script that Tim and Mark gave the Studio Nice. Of course, Studio Nice knocked it out of the park with just injecting his own passion into this while staying true to what makes Kamen America so beloved by the fans. I think I'm going to end it there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Joker is out.
Thank you for stopping by the Velvet Room. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you can keep up with Velvet Room Publishing, and go to velvetroompublishing.com if you want to go even deeper into the Velvet Room.